Good afternoon from Daegu, Korea. Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. Welcome, everyone. We're doing Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 26 through 28 today. This is just about the halfway point through the Bhagavad Gita. And these verses, this verse cluster is one of the most special, precious, and personal verses in the entire Gita, and also of any religious text I know of. So I'm quite excited. I came prepared this time. Got my Om ring, got my copper KC water bottle. I'll almost definitely be having some water before this is over. Very well then. Let us invoke the Supreme Lord and hopefully the mercy of Srila Prabhupada too, who has transmitted to us this Bhagavad Gita as it is. 1972 Macmillan Deluxe Edition, the very, very, very best. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Very well. Let us begin with 26 through 28, as literally translated by H.D. Goswami. When one dedicates to me with devotion a leaf, flower, fruit, or water, I accept that devoted gift from a dedicated soul. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you sacrifice, whatever you gift, whatever trouble you take, make that an offering to me. Thus you will be freed from good and bad fruits, which are karma bondage. As a liberated soul linked by renunciation yoga, you will come to me. So I can tell just by quickly reading through this, that last verse 28, definitely some things missing out in that literal translation, which we'll get a bit more depth translation from Srila Prabhupada on. So let us now get to Srila Prabhupada's translation and purport. Remember, Prabhupada has done 2 translations. Every verse is literally translated and colloquially translated. So sometimes I don't always use the literal translation, but sometimes I do. But there's no less than 3 things available for us for each verse: the literal translation, colloquial translation, and purport. Every verse in the Gita has that from Srila Prabhupada. There is purport in H.D. Goswami's Bhagavad Gita, but it's organized quite differently. So he has it so the entire Gita you can read as one text with no interruptions, from verse 1 in chapter 1 to the final verse in chapter 18. And then there's a whole different section, which is the guide and commentary, which will reference those verses, but they're 2 totally separate sections. And you may not know that this organization Srila Prabhupada uses has been used before by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, and Bhakti Vinod Thakur used it as well. It probably originated from Bhakti Vinod Thakur, because we're talking about translating to English. The 6 Goswamis, I don't think we're doing anything in English. But they may have started that same translation style from, for instance, Sanskrit to Bengali, possibly. I do not believe so, though. Here's 26. If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, fruit, or water, I will accept it. So this has been my favorite verse in the Gita for practically since the beginning. I'm not sure if it still is or not. I think it is. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the immediate potency to it that it's had for me in the past, where there have been many times where I just read or think about this verse and I get really weak in the knees and, it really hits me. Yeah, doesn't have that potency anymore. I will take responsibility for that as my own fault and misgivings. Of course, more than, the Bhagavad Gita hasn't changed. As far as I know, Krishna and Prabhupada haven't changed. But I'm always changing and being swept away by whatever material currents are, happening around me. So the first thing, and also because I've read this verse so many times, I'm trying to find something new to analyze, talk about, study, etc. Especially for this live stream, which is intended for advanced listeners. This is not a beginner live stream for someone who doesn't know the Gita. This is for someone like me who's already read it a whole bunch of times. So what stuck out of me when I was preparing yesterday for this is the 4 examples. So why did Krishna choose 4 examples here and in this order? I think that's definitely significant. And I'm going to speculate why. Once again, going to where I like to normally go. Maybe not always the first place I like to go, but it's always in the back and front of my mind, which is the number and geometry in this text and other Vedic texts, where there's a rhythm and meter to each verse, and it's not just convention. There's a very good scientific and transcendental reason typically for this. And I think that one line, Patram Pushpam Palam Toyam, those 4 words are holographically linked to the 4 lines in a verse that we see in many other verses, where in this case, and it's not always the same geometry, but in this case, it's, leaf. So that's the first little sprout from a plant. And then the flower that literally comes from the leaf. It's the next level of evolution and growth in a plant. And then comes the fruit, which is the next and final level of evolution for a plant. The fruit is the most, there's nothing beyond the fruit. There's no plant that can at least give humans something more or better than its fruit. You could perhaps argue maybe the seed, but the seed is within the fruit. There is no fruit without the seed that's in it. So leaf, then flower, then fruit. There's a consistent gradual evolution there. And then water. What is water? Water is the beginning, the very beginning. Before there was the leaf, there was water. So going beginning, middle, end, and then super beginning. the transcendental beginning, the simplest, most primary cause is the final item listed here. And that's where we get, that's why this is significant, I think, and why it's beautiful and why it symbolizes mercy. So this is symbolic of a lot of what we've been talking about for the past few chapters, where there's many different yogas and austerities you can do. Some, more sophisticated, more advanced, more difficult than others. But ultimately, what works and what is recommended by the Lord himself is the most simple, most primary, most basic of them all, which is simply devotion. If whatever religious activity you do, if it is not done with devotion for the Supreme Lord, it is simply a waste of time. So whatever you think you can offer, whatever you might offer as food stuff to the Lord, if there was no water, you would have no food stuff. And because water has within it that essential power, it is by itself, of course, a great offering. And as we find out later in the purport and in the verse too, it actually doesn't matter the material elements of what you're offering. What matters is the spiritual element, that is the love and dedication and devotion with which that you offer it. It's the offering, it's the act of offering which is being offered, basically. And so in this verse, the word for devotion, dedication is bhakti, or bhaktya and bhaktyu. It's the same word. It's just how it connects with the words after it. So in the second line, bhaktya prayachati, and in the third line, bhaktyupartam. But there's only a U there because it's just contracted with the word after it. Upartam. It's just common Sanskrit and English, and most languages do this, where you have two different vowels right next to each other. If they're not part of the same word, they will be modified a little bit. Each language does it differently, but in the case of Sanskrit, what typically happens is you won't have too many vowels. They'll contract the vowels. So instead of bhaktya upartam, bhaktya going au as two separate phonemes, like sounds, is just strange. Remember, this Bhagavad Gita is chanted, and it's supposed to be chanted and sung and so on, and it doesn't make sense to sing it like that. So if instead you combine it, you cut off that A that might be there by itself in bhaktya in its standard, whatever, pure form, and you instead contract it with the vowel, the first vowel from the next word, bhaktyu partam. It just flows better. And if you're studying this, you can clearly see what the words mean. There's no loss in meaning, but there is a noticeable gain in the acoustics of it, if you will. Another thing that stuck out to me this time is this verse does not seem to have a transition or segue in Sanskrit from the previous verse. But that segue is provided by Srila Prabhupada in the very first sentence of the purport, which I'll read right now. Here, Lord Krishna, having established that he is the only enjoyer, the primeval Lord, and the real object of all sacrificial offerings, reveals what type of sacrifices he desires to be offered. So that was the previous verse. I am all sacrifices. I'm the enjoyer of all sacrifices. Actually, it was the verse before it was actually verse 24, not 25. But same thing. It's from the previous verse cluster. So he said, I am the sacrifice, and I am the receiver of the sacrifice, and I am the enjoyer of the sacrifice. That's basically verse 24. And now, Krishna is going to tell us explicitly, as usual, what kind of sacrifice, what kind of offering he is ready and willing to accept. And then in the next part, in the first paragraph of the purport, Prabhupada goes into vegetarianism a little bit. And Prabhupada talks about how meat, fish, and eggs should not be offered to Krishna. Because if he desired such things, he would have said so. This is, of course, true. But later, it says vegetables, grains, fruits, milk, and water are the proper food for human beings and are prescribed by Lord Krishna himself. So, finding fault with this a little bit. Sorry, Srila Prabhupada. And actually, to be fair, I don't think I actually am finding fault. I'm just really concerned that people will think that that's what I'm doing. So I want to caveat it that way, that I'm not like pretending like I don't know what's happening. Because in this verse, it doesn't say milk, it doesn't say grains, and it doesn't say vegetables. So, but Krishna doesn't only speak in the Bhagavad Gita. There's also the Bhagavatam and all the other Vedic texts. There's so many other texts that do talk about the prescribed foods we're supposed to eat, and I'm pretty sure not only is it true, is it totally true what Prabhupada says here, that vegetables, grains, fruits, and milk and water are the proper food for human beings. And so in that sense, I don't think I'm actually fault finding, because I do agree with him. But it's quite possible that in this purport, that's exactly what Prabhupada was thinking of too, when he said, are prescribed by Lord Krishna himself. He doesn't say in this verse. Prabhupada just says by Lord Krishna. So that could be referring to not only, just one other Shastra, but a whole bunch of other Shastras. And if that's true, then that would make sense why he didn't bother saying exactly this Upanishad or whatever. Because it's, some things are just so self-evident and obvious, especially for a certain level of realization. You don't need to explicitly reference it. But just for the sake of science and academics, I will go into it a little bit more. Milk is different. So there are some vegetables, but yeah, there are some vegetables that are different too, like carrots and potatoes, like those root vegetables. Those are not the leaf, flower, or fruit of the plant. It's in those four examples Prabhupada or Krishna mentioned, the root is kind of in between water and the leaf. It's a beginning stage of the plant before the leaf, but of course after water, because there's no plant without water, that Krishna didn't explicitly mention. But you could argue that, okay, because we've got the leaf, flower, and fruit, and it's showing growth, and then they all originally come from water, that's, and Krishna has only time in one verse to say 4 words, so he didn't have time to also say the stem, the root, you can't say every single thing, the seed, the bark, so you could, I think easily speculate, perhaps, or logically deduce or infer that the root vegetables are bona fide. Now, and that is one thing that's mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, I'm pretty sure. Sannyasis will eat roots in the forest to survive. So if sannyasis are doing it, I think it's fine, we can do it. But milk is different. Not in a bad way, in a very interesting way. So Milk, it's a liquid, so I'm sure it has some water content to it. Must. But where does milk come from? Milk, I believe, comes from blood, first and foremost, um, which is a different category of thing, which, once again, in this verse, it just doesn't fit in with this verse. But yet again, if you look at the other Vedic texts, like 10th canto Bhagavatam, I think, is most of the time where you'll see, well, you'll read about Krishna, with as a cowherd boy, stealing butter, drinking milk. Krishna loves milk. So not only will Krishna accept an offering of milk, I've heard from, I think, Prabhupada, but definitely so many other Vaishnavas, that milk is actually so special. It's kind of already offered, because it's when you do it right and you have a ahimsa dairy situation going. I don't even want to say farm, because the idea of a farm is, in some ways, how you define it is not ahimsa, just by, like, if you define farm as a business with a tax code, and now we're starting to get into violence just by the definition. But if you just have some cow, totally peaceful, happy, and the cow is giving plenty of milk to its babies and then some extra for you too. I've heard that milk like that is actually already offered. It does not need to be offered because it's so closely connected with Bhumi Devi, with the mother god, Mother Earth god, and Krishna too, and it's like super bona fide basically. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't offer it or you can't offer it. And of course, this happens in every ISKCON center all the time. There's milk treats and yogurt, all sorts of different milk things are offered on the puja table. But, once again, what am I doing here? This is mostly an academic exercise in studying the text itself, more or less in a vacuum, mostly because that vacuum is what we got here. I am not super, I haven't finished reading the entire Bhagavatam yet. I've read at least half of it, I think, but and that's it. I haven't read more than a couple verses in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. I've read a few Upanishads. I've read actually all of the major ones. Yeah, there's still so many things I don't know. So, and what I've naturally done is stuck primarily and purely with the Bhagavad Gita as much as possible, because I really don't need anything else and I really don't want anything else. And it's totally perfect. So why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's kind of how I'm doing my own spiritual life. But at the same time, I read the Bhagavatam when I can, and I do like it. And that's that. Going back to meat, fish, and eggs, what those things are far away in tattva. They're quite in mundane tattva, at least. They're far away from leaf, fruit, flower, and water. They're all animal products, and plants are not animals. They're just a different tattva. And once again, even though milk is almost definitely a bona fide food stuff and offering for the Lord, I think I'm right with the reason why that's not mentioned in this verse is because for this kind of text, Krishna is really concerned with maintaining a coherence and keeping the tattvas, the tattvic discriminations, distinguishings, whatever, very, very clear, because this is the basis for like everything else. So the more advanced topic of like, what about milk and this story? Yeah, there's like other texts for that. But we're talking about the most basic foundation of everything here. And this verse is all about simple things. Just Krishna says, just offer me simple things. And, a leaf. He doesn't use the plural form. I'm pretty sure Sanskrit has a plural form, and Krishna could have said leaves, fruits, flowers. He didn't. He said, just give me one leaf, one fruit, one little flower, a little bit of water. That's enough. That is enough. And that segues into the next point, which I believe Prabhupada mentions in the purport. He says, but preparing nice, simple vegetable dishes, offering them before the deity, Krishna, whatever, and praying for him to accept such a humble offering, enable one to advance steadily in life, purify the body, and create fine brain tissues, which will lead to clear thinking. And above all, with love. So, why do I bring that up? Well, obviously because it's true, and because Prabhupada brought it up. That's a big part of it. But also, this is a common point shared by myself, H.D. Goswami, and others. Well, what do we see in ISKCON centers? Do we see simple vegetable dishes? Only sometimes. A lot of the times it's very advanced, spicy, complicated, elaborate preparations. Doesn't mean it's bad. They're vegetarian, and if they're offered with love, that's great. But that's not what this verse is talking about. That's not the fundamental principle. And if you're really a Brahmin, really renounced, you actually won't have the taste for gulab jamun and like so many things, goranga potatoes, like no. But if you're a preacher, if you're heading out to the city streets doing book distribution, you need some calories, bro. You need that's where this comes from. That's the Leela of ISKCON. And the kind of food preparations we have, that's why they're like that. So people who have never been heard anything like this, but they come in like, whoa, this food is so cool, bro. And then the preachers who are, they can get all the fuel they need real quick, and they get in a great mood, and bam, they go out there and do it. This is so it's Rajasic. It's Rajasic food for Rajasic purposes. Doesn't mean they're not transcendental, but a lot of these ISKCON foods do go more into Rajaguna for a good reason, historically speaking. But for me personally, that's never been relevant, really. I always would rather just simple things. And finally, the third paragraph of the purport, Prabhupada talks about the impersonalists and how this verse is like, it's so personal, right? So this is a really important mercy verse or grace tattva verse. And it's also important and significant within the tattva of highly, radically personal verses from Krishna, about Krishna, and so on. And if you are an impersonalist, you have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to make sense of this, which is stupid because it's so obvious that this guy, this Sri Bhagavan guy that we keep hearing about in these verses, is actually a guy. And, uses the pronoun aham, which means I. How is that not a person if he's using the pronoun I? Is it possible for a blip of energy or something to be I? I don't know, man. I don't think that's how basic language and ideas work. Also, we want to keep in mind that these verses were spoken to Arjuna on the battlefield. So 5,000 years later, it's very effective as a foundational philosophical text, but in its historical context, Krishna does not have time right now to go into, the leaf is good, but it's a little better than the root, but the root is okay too of the plant, and milk is good too, yes, but not meat and not fish and not, he doesn't have time to go into all the different intricacies. He's just going to say, give me some simple things. It doesn't, what's the purport? What's the moral of the first line of this verse? Not even the whole verse, but just the first line is, keep it simple. A simple offering is totally sufficient and good. Simple, that word simple is not just some pretty word that Prabhupada uses in the purport. It has a technical meaning, which is synonymous with pure. Purity and simplicity are synonymous. They are much the same thing, which is why Prabhupada said simple living, high thinking. It's very difficult to have time to do lots of high thinking when you're living a complicated life. But if you only need, to fill your belly with some food, if that's the only thing you care about per, 16 hours of sunlight every day, and it only needs 2 or 3 hours to do that, well, what are you going to do with the rest of your day? High thinking. And the high thinking feeds back into the simple living. You need even less calories. You need even less elaborate meals and dishes. It's a virtuous cycle and feedback loop that keeps going on there. So I may take it for granted that Prabhupada mentions how Krishna has no need for food since he already possesses everything in existence, and it's just the love and devotion that Krishna accepts. But for many other religions and religious people, this is actually could be seen as a provocative idea. And even for other personal sects in Hinduism. And what's my own personal relationship with this? Well, when I'm preparing an offering, I like making a dish that has some very particular but mundane and material characteristics about it that'll make it taste great, or it's crafted in a certain way, which is excellent. And, I'm hoping Krishna will appreciate that ethos that I put into it. But what we've seen here, what Krishna says and what Prabhupada says, is that Krishna is not the Lord of ethos. He's the Lord of Ananda, the Lord of bliss, love, and yoga. And for this game, you do not need to do anything elaborately. Anything. Your sacrifice, your anything, your offering, your charity, none of it needs to be elaborate or advanced, sophisticated, whatever. It can be just simple and sattvic, and that's good. The final sentence in the purport is the perfect summary that brings us back to the very introduction of the Gita, where Prabhupada tells us that only a devotee can understand this text. And I don't think it's because this text is a secret. It correlates to what Jesus says. Those who have the eyes to see can see, but those who don't have the ears to hear will not hear. It's actually, I'm paraphrasing Jesus. I don't remember the exact verse, but, That's how it is. Jesus and Krishna and Prabhupada are telling it to us as it is in plain English. You don't even, anyone who graduates high school or even middle school can conceptually comprehend and understand all of this. But to realize it, to really get it, you must either be a devotee yourself or be associating with a devotee or reading it with a devotee. Otherwise, you probably won't get any of this. Actually, the final words are really interesting. Only the devotee, ... can understand that the supreme absolute truth can eat food and enjoy it. Enjoy is a key word here. So Krishna is the only enjoyer. So if Krishna's not enjoying it, then no one's enjoying anything. So it's kind of like Krishna has to enjoy these offerings. He has no other choice but to enjoy these offerings. And we think we enjoy, but we actually do not. Whatever enjoyment we have is naturally being moved upwards. 27. O son of Kunti, all that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer and give away, as well as all austerities that you may perform, should be done as an offering unto me. Wow, my notes here are almost as long as the whole purport. It's just a one paragraph purport, but why do I have so many notes here? Anyway, so the second verse in this cluster is generalizing the previous verse to all other activities, not just offering foodstuffs, but literally everything else you do should be done in the same way that was just mentioned in the last verse, with love and devotion and with simplicity. One thing I didn't get to go deep into is the Sanskrit word for offering. It's different. In verse 27, it's arpanam, but that was 27. In 26, the word for offer is uphartam, which sounds like patram, a leaf. So there could be a connection there. And also prayachati also means offers. So we have three totally different words that all mean offer. And now that I see that, it's probably the same reason I've seen it so many other times in the Gita. It's on the one end, it's poetic. It's offering variety, which will please the listener, Arjuna, but also us. And also when you're ready to go deep into it, then yes, it allows a scholar or advanced devotee to pick away at all the little intricacies there that Krishna is giving us. Was that worth it? Was it worth getting into yesterday when I took my notes or right now? No, I don't think so. So we're moving on. So how do we do this? How do we offer everything to Krishna, every single thing? How? Well, Prabhupada tells us in the very first sentence of the purport. Thus, it is the duty of everyone to mold his life in such a way that he will not forget Krishna in any circumstance. And then, so here's why the notes are so long. It's because there's a little book editing thing I noticed. So in the final sentence, Prabhupada writes, ... If anyone practices meditating on Krishna 24 hours by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra round his beads, he is surely the greatest yogi, as substantiated by the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So actually, now that I read it out loud, I was totally wrong as I was reading this. This sentence is totally fine. It could be, to make it more like, I don't know, American plain English or something. You could change it a little bit, but it's correct. There's no problem here. Maybe around his beads is better than round his beads, but I don't think so. I think it's actually perfect. And 24 hours, technically, to be fully comprehensible in a vacuum, it should say 24 hours per day. But we know what Prabhupada's talking about. It's implied, and we should be intelligent enough to assume that that's what he's doing here. So no problem at all. But yeah, for whatever reason, like when I was taking my notes, it was the English language aspect that stuck out at me, but it was all revolving around that word beads, which in my book looks a little bit like heads, because the B, it's really interesting. There's some verses that, there's something kind of strange about how it's worded. And then there's also at the same time something strange about how it's printed. Like the letter looks a little disformed or something. Let me look for another B to compare it to. Nope, it's a standard B. I don't know, it just stuck out at me I want to read it as heads, but it's beads. And how often does Prabhupada mention beads in the Gita? Not many times. And that's probably why for a few years when I was first starting out as a devotee, I never even had the intuition to go buy some beads. I remember reading about chanting the mantra, and I would do that. I would just chant spontaneously whenever I wanted to, but the idea of getting beads, it just never stuck until I actually started associating with ISKCON. And I saw everyone else with these beads. I was like, oh, darn, I better get some of these beads. Where's the 6th chapter verse? I think that's 28. Oh, no, it's the last line. So, chanting the mantra around his beads, he is surely the greatest yogi, as substantiated by the 6th chapter. So it sounds like Prabhupada means the entire 6th chapter is the proof of that. But we don't have a verse provided, so I'm not actually sure about that, what that's referring to, and I really want to know. For now, what we can do is just look at the title of chapter 6, Sankhya Yoga. It's not very helpful. So much more studying to do. That's why I stick with the Gita, because I still don't fully have it. So why should I do something else? I haven't graduated from the Gita yet, so what am I doing? Studying and practicing anything else? Doesn't make sense, actually. Verse 28. In this way, you will be freed from all reactions to good and evil deeds, and by this principle of renunciation, you will be liberated and come to me. How are we doing here? 45 minutes. Going to try and wrap this up quickly. So this is the end of the verse cluster. And what is the end? That means telos, not the physical end, but what is the purpose for offering in general and offering in the particular way that Krishna has been talking about here? Well, here he tells us explicitly, as he often likes to do. And once again, just like the very first line in 26, he doesn't just tell us, but he gives us a precise number of things in a precise order, which is significant. So, in order, first, we are freed from all reactions, good and bad. Then, second, we become liberated. And last, third, we can come to Krishna. Mam upaishyasi, you will attain me. In the second or third paragraph of the purport, it's really interesting. Prabhupada hints that basically anyone can be considered a sannyasi, if they're just dedicating their whole life to Krishna, which is called, if you're doing that, no matter what kind of person you are, the technical term is yukta vairagya. And there's an interesting point about that. Moving on a little bit. Although a pure devotee who is completely engaged in the service of the Lord may sometimes appear to go against the prescribed Vedic duties, actually, it is not so. And if you're a fault finder, or if, like me, you're just like really precise academically and you're just looking at everything in detail, yeah, you can find, quote, mistakes, unquote, for every pure devotee. Prabhupada, Jesus, Krishna himself, of course. That's exactly why we're not recommended to study the 10th canto and just go right into Rasa Leela, because you'll be so naturally fault finding. Oh, Krishna's doing adultery, and it's like, yeah, that's true in a sense, but there's a level of transcendence and purity here that you're not there yet. You're not qualified to understand it. And in your position, all you can do is just be an a-hole about it. So instead of being an a-hole, just, wait till you're ready. So what is a good example, though? What's a really good example of this? I think the best example is a short while before Jesus was crucified. He did a lot of things that were against the Torah, against the Hebrew law. And of those things, what's most memorable to me, especially if, like me, you've seen so many different Jesus Leela in TV shows and movies, Jesus would cure blindness and heal the sick on the Sabbath. Maybe it was right in front of the temple or not. I don't remember. But, he was healing people and bringing people back to God. He was doing the most amazing pure devotee work anyone can possibly do. Great, great miracles. But it's technically on the Sabbath and you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. So according to some mundane religious rule, that's what it is. And that's why this is special, what we're talking about here. It's a spiritual science. It's not a religion. So religion is mundane, actually. And when you can see which aspect of your religion is mundane and meant, and is meant for materialistic people in a material world, and, is not perfect in that sense, it's not absolutely true. versus something which is eternally, spiritually, absolutely, bona fidely true, like verse 26 in chapter 9. That's always true. That's always something you can use in any 26 and 27 is always applicable to anything and everything you do, not just in your spiritual life and religious life, but literally everything else you possibly ever do. It's always applicable. And there are some people who want to make a religion out of it, which is different. But making a religion out of it will say, "Oh, Prabhu," which I sometimes have the tendency to do. "Oh, Prabhu, you made an offering which is not simple. It's too complicated. It's not a good offering. Throw it away. Give me another offering." But then, well, if you're actually following these verses, then I would introspect at my own actions. Was what I did as a religious person, leader, whatever, manager in that instance, whatever, was what I was doing a good offering, a good and simple offering to the Lord? No, it wasn't. So there's a double lose there. Would have been better if I just said, "Oh, thank you, Prabhu, for this nice offering." And then, they're in a good mood and they can offer it with a good love. And then later I'll say, "Oh, well, next time you don't have to use so much turmeric and chili pepper and so on. We can, just have something a bit more simple. And it'll be easier for you too. You don't have to work so hard adding all the different spices. And if the timing's right and I say it very simply, he can accept it very simply. And then that's a good offering. And then the next offering is a good offering. And then Krishna is actually pleased. But you do that through science. What I just demonstrated is spirit science, is using rationality with the scripture, as opposed to relying on religious codes and laws and thinking, "Oh, because on section 1.2, you followed what it says, therefore you did something good." That's the same thing the materialists do with government laws. And that's not how reality works. That's not how ethics works. And that's not how spirituality works either. But that's really important to note. It's not even how ethics works. Even in a mundane sense, what separates the good person and the bad person is character and behavior across many years and habits and many different months and instances. It's not, "Oh, he followed this rule, he is a good person. He disobeyed that rule, he's a bad person." That's monkey life. That's not. And there are many religious people who are doing the same kind of monkey life, monkey consciousness. That's not it. So what happened in the Jesus Leela was those Pharisees thought that following a mundane religious rule was more important than healing the sick and bringing people back to God. And they were dead wrong. Literally dead wrong. They were so wrong, they would have benefited more by simply dying, by simply giving up their life and body in that instant and just saying, I'm not qualified to do anything here. I'm just dead. I'm so done. And just dying right away. That would have been what they should have done, because they were so out of place. And I think that's exactly why they killed Jesus, because there was death there. There was a deep-seated satanic, evil, tamasic death, energy of death there. And energy has to go somewhere. So, and because they were a huge group of people with that energy, they could all funnel it and channel it directly onto Jesus, which was prophesied. And that's what happened. And then he resurrected, blah, blah, blah. They had no choice but to murder him. That's kind of what it seems like to me. If they don't murder, what else can they do? Just say, "Oh, okay, do better next time." No, they knew. They're smart. They knew he's just going to keep doing miracles. He's going to keep getting more followers, and they will die. even if they don't physically die, they will, if they just let Jesus keep doing what he's doing, they will lose their authority, they will lose their post, they will lose their money, they will die. They will die. Jesus came to kill them, and they said, no, we're going to kill you. And they did. They killed him. And by doing that, Jesus was able to kill them for generations. Once again, I don't mean physically. There's figurative death. There's a lot of different things going on here. But Prabhupada goes a little further into this example about pure devotees who sometimes do something against prescribed duties and religious rules. Because of that, even the most intelligent person cannot understand the plans and activities of a pure devotee. And Prabhupada gives us exact words there as a reference here. Vaishnavera kriya mudra vigye na budhaya. Such a pure devotee type person is considered completely liberated at present and in the future. He is guaranteed to go back home, back to Godhead, and he is above all materialistic criticism. So when Prabhupada says the most intelligent person, that specifically means material intelligence. And Krishna is, of course, above all criticism, which is the primary reason it doesn't make sense to put any of your time or effort in criticizing Krishna, because it doesn't go anywhere. It's like throwing 1 cup of water at a 10-ton stone and thinking you're going to erode it. You can erode stone with water, but you need millions of years, and like just 1 cup of water is not going to do it. You're being a fool if you think that's worth some time. And this reminded me of verse 34 in chapter 4, 434, which you could call the guru verse or the disciple verse, whatever you like. So what are we actually supposed to do with a pure devotee? We have to be as humble as possible. We have to understand that even if we're very intelligent, the most intelligent, we can't actually understand what they're doing. From their perspective, at least we can. We can understand from a mundane perspective why they're doing it. And they'll tell us too, like, hey, Prabhupada, why do you use a toothpick in that way to clean your tooth? Oh, well, it says, in Ayurveda to do this and that. And then, oh yeah, because the teeth are built like this sort of way. And I rinse my mouth after eating every meal. So just the rinsing and the toothpicking is sufficient, and then you think about it and it makes sense. And it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. But that's all mundane and materialistic. As soon as you get into the spiritual or transcendental and you're dealing with a pure devotee, you have no place. Your only place is to say, yes, sir, and follow. That's your only place. All right. That was a really good stream. So we're going to stop right there just before the 1 hour mark. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Here is Krishna's holy name on my finger. It's so pretty and it's gold. Bye, Krishna. Bye, Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis everywhere. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita, as it is. See you next time.